All right, here we go. Gonna do this again. Let's do it up. Let's make some drawing. All right, paper's all centered up. Okay, cool. So this time, I'm gonna do pretty much the same thing I did before. I really have no idea what I'm gonna draw. I needed to do some other things earlier, so I did some sketches while I was doing those things. But I found that I was interested in like large blocky shapes, and I just want to see where those go. Saying it changes it though, like when I say, oh, I'm interested in large blocky shapes, so I'm not quite in that space where the idea is in control, and that's the place I'm going, where you see me going right now, and that's why my voice is sort of slowing down, and I'm trying to like gain focus, or gain a kind of focus. I guess I'm defocusing. That brings up an interesting idea, or series of ideas. The nature of focus. What is focus? What is soft focus? What is hard focus? No one ever talks about hard focus. But yeah, we talk about focus. We say focus, and we say unfocused. And where there's unfocused, it's soft focus. I mean, I suppose this is fun. Let's try this. You could diagram it this way. You could say like, there's hard focus, and then you have soft focus, right? And this is where, in this region, you've got the ultimate, right? It's so ultimate. You've got not 4 squares, but you've got, like, that's, I mean, can you get harder focus than that? It's so hard focused that the lines that are used to divide the lines that are used to divide are now taking up more space, more energy, more thought than the entities they're meant to separate. And in soft focus, let's be obvious here. I mean, if this is almost black, then soft focus has got to be white, right? All right, and then if you move this way, you've got, if this is hard and this is soft, and there's a line between hard and soft, and this is ultimate and that's ultimate, well then this soft focus must be the ultimate, right? And so this focus must then be a soft focus that is less extreme. So less extreme soft focus, and then over here we've got less extreme hard focus. So you've got major divisions, and we've got a world. Now, obviously, there's another way to do this. Like, you could easily switch those two. All right, let's try to get this a little bit faster. Well, you know what? This is not for a school project. it's not due tomorrow. This is the time where I get to chill out and do things the way I want to. Nobody's waiting for this. Nobody's tapping their feet, saying, hey, where's that drawing? This is where I get to draw for enjoyment. So I get to slow down and get the drawing that I want and allow my mind to move in the ways that I'd like for it to move. Another way to put that would be that I allow hey, I just wanted to get that right. Oh yeah, so we've got, yeah, so another way to put that, or was I was saying I allow myself to, allow my mind to move in the way that it wants to move, is another way to put it, I think. Yeah. So here we have oneness. And then here we have the ultimate atomization. Now, here's the exciting part. You guys ready for the exciting part? All right. If you were to take this ultimate atomization one step forward, what you might find you can see where I'm going with this. One division, two divisions, multiple divisions. Right. So you get the idea that as you move forward, your level of focus changes. But in the same way that one moves towards ultimate atomization in this direction, you might move towards, I could have left that one that way and then just use this as a signpost. Oneness is this way. The ultimate atomization, surprise, surprise, is identical. In other words, if you see all things as being equivalently atomistic, it's no different from seeing everything as one undifferentiated block of matter. I mean, it doesn't have to be a block. I just use a block because I've used these squares here. And that's interesting, right? And we're talking about hard focus and soft focus here. I have an idea of something that I'd like to do. And let's go back to this sheet for a while. Like, if this is my composition, let's just create a picture plane here. And I'm thinking in terms of, it's a big block here. Let's have it run off the panel here, or shall we say frame. And then let's have another shape. Let's say make it a little different from the other shape. This one doesn't run off, right? And then let's create another shape back here runs off over here, runs off of there. Let's go crazy. Let's create a window here. That's exciting. All right, so if we've done that, let's make things a little bit more clear here. If that's my composition, how far back am I? In other words, what is the viewing distance? In this case, this area has been reduced to a really tiny area. And so all the little details are all scrunched up together. And so they end up being blocks. And those blocks mean what they're supposed to mean, or whatever. Like even when I do that, like I created like what will, for all intents and purposes, label as a mountain range over here. And we let this block that I started with running off of the panel act as a window. And in doing that, I created another mountain range here. And I separated out these two areas with a set of vertical strokes. But in this case, since I've used vertical strokes here, this is exciting. This is the thing that's exciting. I wish people pay attention to this kind of thing. When you create, actually I might have ruined it just a little bit. But this line here, it is a negative shape. It falls behind this object, right? But when this part from behind was placed in front of this, now this negative shape starts to match with this shape. And that's interesting. That's exciting. That does something. Because now what we've done is we've created two separate elements that are doing opposite things but generating the same effect. Now you'll note, like you didn't see me think about this at all, you know? I didn't work it out. This is something that came up, and because I stayed alive to the idea, I noticed it. And I think that's what people don't, people don't realize, but it's true. A lot of people don't realize that, like, that's 99% of what artists do, is that they notice things. You notice a similarity, you notice opposition, you notice gradations, you notice spectrums, and everybody does. Everybody notices these things. It's just that when an artist is paying attention, and when they have the time to do that, they will work with those kinds of relationships between objects. Like even as I'm talking to you right now, there are things that are showing up to me, and I'm paying attention to them. I'm working with them. There's a way that this object here that's running behind can be thought of as contributing to another series of shapes which denote a form. And this in itself, okay, so clearly I'm working in an abstract way, right? Like none of these shapes have very much to do with the world that you see. Like you're not going to go down to U-Haul and, say, oh, I'd like to buy a truck, or I'd like to rent a truck. And then they go, oh, well, hold on, Larry, let's look at these shapes. That doesn't happen. But the relationships between the shapes, that's foundational to interactions that we have with other people, and the way that we use verbiage, and the way that words are interpreted. And I hate to say it, But I'm going to mention Heidegger again. Dude was right when he says language is the house of being. I realized earlier today, someone on a YouTube channel was saying something about how, like, oh yeah, I don't really speak all that well, and so people make all kinds of they make all kinds of I say negative things about people who don't articulate themselves well, as though that makes them lesser or something. And that's true, they aren't lesser. However, our comportment to the world, our way of orienting ourselves towards the world, is such that if we don't have mastery over language, we will be vulnerable to a whole slew of tricks and also, I mean, to make it, not so negative, having mastery over language allows us to see different things, and that's part of what I'm doing here. I mean, I'm sure you see this, right? You see the parallel. Mastery over, or a deep understanding of the ways in which reality relates to itself, within itself. Man, that was difficult. Let's say it this way. The world's made of stuff. Let's make it simple. The world has stuff in it. Maybe it's not made of stuff, but the world definitely can be seen as something that has stuff in it. And the stuff in it relates to other stuff in it. And if we understand, that's it. If we understand the way that things relate to themselves or relate to each other on their own terms, then we will have, well, to put it in like the capitalistic way of looking at things, we will have better mastery over the world, but more importantly, we will understand our place in it. So it's not a question of just like, oh, how can I beat up the world so that I can get more? That's a very, let's just say it's less skillful. I mean, yes, obviously, when you're tying your shoes, you want to have mastery over those shoelaces. But if you relate to the world as something that has got to be beaten into submission, well, then you've missed at least a portion of the boat. Like, yes, beat some of it into submission, but understand that both has got to happen. Like, the world is going to beat you into submission, and you can judo some of that if you want, but understanding your place in the world is a big deal. If you're floating in outer space and you look back at planet Earth, you recognize that that's your home. People talk about that effect a lot. You recognize it's your home. You might think differently about the way that we're, drilling into Anwar or what have you. But I guess that's politics, and we're not supposed to talk about politics. All right, now I've been fooling around with this, and you can see that I've taken what was a very rigid square shape, and then I took advantage of the fact that this frame could be seen as something that's penetrating against an exterior world to indicate that, yes, by penetrating this world, it's entering into another world. And in that other world, it's like Farnsworth from Futurama. But by entering that other world, you enter a place where different rules take place, whereas everything is super rigid. And I believe the word is, well, you'd say inorganic, I think. Here, very rigid and rectilinear. In this world, you can give yourself permission for a little, what they call diametric opposition. And then in this world, you end up with more curvilinear forms, organic forms. And the suggestion that perhaps in this other world, in the world that you started in, where things are rigid and stable, perhaps there's yet another way that things are opposed. In other words, in this curvilinear and organic world, and you probably see this coming a mile away, but in the curvilinear world, you end up with objects that don't obey the same kinds of rules, the same kinds of ideas. There's a kind of an instability of fluidity. In fact, so much so that the images begin to penetrate into the other kinds of spaces. You see me do this a lot with these shapes. I hope you can see it, but like I'm leaving a lot of spaces open, and when you do that, it makes it possible to wrap back around. This is not a good one. I'm just doing it for example. Where you've started a shape and then allow it to connect to another shape here. And this is actually kind of getting exciting because you can see like what was a solid shape, solid form, started to reveal itself to be a form that is acting like fire or water. And then in the upper reaches of that same form, where the pieces are, you know, flitting off of each other, you might see that there's actually some sort of structure that they're adhering to. So in other words, there's a secret way in which the world that we understand to be fluid and inchoate, that's one of my favorite words. In other words, not fully formed. That we can see that they're actually adhering to another structure underneath it, but we cannot see it. Reminds me a lot of this time. I was taking a break with some of my friends. They were smokers, I wasn't, and we were watching the smoke rise, and we were talking about how beautiful that could be, like looking at the smoke. And I don't know who it was that said it. I kind of want to give myself credit. I'm pretty sure it was the one who said it. But I said something to the effect of, you know, I love watching the smoke. The exciting thing about it is that it's not the smoke that's complex. You know, the complexity that we see in the smoke is not the smoke itself. The complexity was always there to begin with, and the smoke merely revealed it. Now, I mean, there's questions about like the physics of that, obviously. Like, if you have some sort of a particulate, you know, smoke coming off of a burning object, it's of course the particles in that don't just, you know, ride along the air currents without any sort of effect on it. But for the most part, I think it's true, and I think that that's true about a lot of the phenomena that we see. A lot of times there's an incredible amount of stuff that's happening, and it looks like, oh my gosh, there's so much complexity here. But what we're actually seeing is the complexity that was just below the surface, and we either refuse to see it by virtue of the fact that we're paying attention to other things, or Mother Nature, so to speak, did not grant us the capacity to see things, quote unquote, at that level. Well, because of that, we end up surprised by the complexity, and the complexity is what is surrounding us all of the time, and that's exciting, because that means that anytime you're watching something, like, oh, let us watch that event. In effect, what's really happening is you're saying, let us watch the event wherein the complexity has been made explicit. Now I mean, come on, man. If you're looking for something interesting, that's interesting. Because what that ends up meaning is that if you're just staring into space and nothing is happening, you can only conclude, like, if you really take me seriously, you can only conclude that nothing is happening in accordance with the ways in which your senses have been calibrated. I'm slowing down for this stuff because I know these sentences are really complex, and it's much better to write this stuff down because then you can go back and forth. And I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with people where it's like, oh, you should be able to get this, but they're like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, man. But you know, this is also YouTube, so you have the opportunity to slow down and like watch it again. But I don't know who hates themselves that much. You can see I'm kind of like going back to some concepts that I liked before. I think I talked about these kinds of things where you have what's obviously turning itself out to be a kind of a head, and then there's an extensor or tentacle-like object projecting from the head, and then it's entering into a, shall we say, portal of sorts. And I'm not making any kind of psychosexual claims about any of that, but you know, I do find that kind of thing interesting. I mean, it's all around us. It's in plumbing and wire work. It's all over the place. You got male and female plugs. It's just the way it is. But that kind of thing is visually arresting. But I would say that that's only, you know, if that's visually arresting and the scale I give that is like a 2 out of 10, then this is probably like a 5 or a 9 out of 10. Like I ended this line here, and I'll just reinforce it a little bit. Ended this line here, and this shape here gives off the impression of the top of a head and a brow, and then you've got these 2 holes here which are just eye holes, and then you've got these 2 lines here that suggest, well, eyes. But I didn't finish the bottom, and now I've got what should be a cheekbone here, but I didn't complete it. So what I did do is give a shadow here that helps you to feel like your eye sort of feels, and it's probably enhanced by the shape of the edge of this curve here. You feel that there's a shape here, and I'm not going to draw that line. And I mean, obviously that happens because, you know, there's a light source up here that's blowing out those highlights, and that's something that happens a lot with that kind of drawing, with a what they call a contour line drawing. But it's the sort of thing I look for when I'm making an abstract piece, and I'm seeing the things that are suggested and then emphasizing them. This is a completely different process from thinking, oh, this is an arm, and here is where the bicep goes, and then here is da-da-da-da-da. This is not me saying, hey, paper, I need you to do this for me, because if you do that, then I'll be able to sell this to somebody. It's a different kind of a thing. It's opening oneself up to the way things are on the paper and in one's mind in such a way that the way things are act as an instruction manual for interpreting what things might become. This is, I mean, gosh, it sounds really complex, but it's very different from what a lot of other people talk about when they talk about art. It's like, oh, what do you want to do today? I want to draw a tree. Oh, how do I draw a tree? Well, you gotta have a trunk, and then you gotta have some branches. And it's not wrong. It's actually a very good thing to do. You definitely want to get your quote-unquote basics down, but that's sort of not what I'm interested in when I'm making artwork for myself on my own time. And by posting it here with you, I'm giving myself the opportunity to explore these ideas and do it in front of an audience, which is a different kind of experience. It's kind of wild. Now, what you'll see, I'm gonna do it. You're definitely gonna see it. I haven't quite done it just yet, sort of, but I've only implied the beginning of it. But we talked about how this light source from up here is blowing out that highlight, and that's forming that shape, right? So if I continue with that shape, or if I continue with that idea, then I want to maintain the light source. But you can see on this edge here, I've done the same thing. So I have a very strong light source here, but I violated that principle by having this area back here have a very heavy line. And that line is not supposed to be heavy. If it is heavy, then it indicates that the light's actually coming from this side, right? Or there's something else happening back there along the z-axis. And if I'm super clever, and I'm all right, but if I'm super clever, I can extend the back of the skull, which people don't attend to enough. A lot of times people leave out the back of the skull when they're drawing heads and stuff. As my my great, not late, but my great art professor used to say, leave room for brain. We always used to like repeat what he said, but it's true. If you're drawing a figure and you got a skull in there, you can't just like stop the skull without thinking about the fact that a brain's got to sit in there. And that's sort of the beautiful thing about anatomy, that you start to realize the places where the shorthand you've developed for understanding how objects that you take to understand, like, oh, this is a house, it has a triangle on top. Like, these are just symbols. You've memorized a series of symbols, and then you're trying to fit things together so that you can trick someone else who's memorized the same series of symbols into seeing the same thing that you saw. But if they're humans that walk around and look at things, they won't be tricked. Like, they're gonna see where what you've drawn has very little to do with what they see in reality. And that's kind of what's exciting about comic books. Now, I should say comic books, I should say comic book lines. That's what's exciting about comic book lines, contour lines, and this type of artwork. Like violating that line, or violating that highlight that I talked about before, if I continue to violate that idea that light's coming from the top, and I will, what will end up happening is that these lines start to deviate significantly from what we take to be reality. And they start to be direct interpretations of what is already in your mind as symbols. Now that's exciting. Imagine that, a series of symbols in your brain that you understand. Or maybe even better, you don't understand, but then because you've laid things out carefully, and maybe, I was going to say consciously, better to say unconsciously, but I shouldn't say consciously, what I should say is deliberately. What you've laid out deliberately ends up revealing what's already in your head that you have perhaps ignored. And this, my friends, it's the power of love. No, it's the power of art. Like, that's exciting. Is that, like a dream, the series of symbols that you've memorized or you've taken to be live. In other words, if you were to see them again, you might have the same kinds of feelings. They are live symbols. They start to carry significance. And so the question is, where does meaning come from? There are a lot of different answers to that, but I tend to believe that meaning probably should be explained in terms of communication or expression. Like if you're talking about meaning and you don't mention communication or expression, you're not talking about a kind of meaning that I know about. So I did make a diagram earlier, I want to say a couple of days ago. I would fish it out or try to remember exactly what it said, but I don't remember when I wrote it. I think I might have woke up in the middle of the night and wrote it down. It's always the case that when you write these things down, you're like, oh my gosh, I know it. I figured it out. That's it's become kind of a catchphrase for me. I figured it out, because there are some things that I feel like I've been working on for quite some time, and then I get ecstatic because I think that the way that I've seen things has been dynamically altered. I don't know if dynamically is the word that I want to use there, but it's been foundationally altered. So I see things from a different angle. And when you do that, when you see things from a new angle, it gives you the feeling that perhaps what was obscure to you previously has been laid bare. And that's exciting. I think that a lot of people use the term breakthrough for something like that. But, you know, I think that the nature of truth, or shall we say, the nature of truth disclosure when it comes to abstractions made concrete. Oh my gosh, I'm talking in a very complex way. But yeah, when it comes to abstractions made complete, the nature of truth, oh man, I don't want to get this too many blurs here, is iterative. I'll say it again because I interrupted myself a bunch of times. When it comes to abstract truths made complete, the nature of truth revelation or breakthrough is iterative. What do you mean by that? Why would you say a thing like that? Well, my philosophy professor used to talk about Nietzsche this way. He'd say that it was as though he was climbing a ladder and then he was kicking out the rungs from underneath him as he ascended. And this was his nature of truth revelation or truth discovery. And I think that I may not have read Nietzsche with the same level of depth as my philosophy professor. Of course, you know, he was like a god to me because, you know, I was just learning. But I think that holds some water when it comes to a lot of the more confusing concepts that human beings have deemed not really worth our time. I mean, if you look at the way that a lot of philosophy and art is treated in pop culture, or, you know, just listen to your mom and dad. I want to study art. I want to study philosophy. Oh no. Well, what have you done? I spent all this time and effort trying to make money so that you could go to school, and you studied something so useless. It's a period of lamenting. But I think that there are probably some, I guess, quote unquote enlightened parents out there that that might find that kind of thing kind of exciting. You know, like maybe my son, daughter, or other is someone who is going to understand things at a more fundamental level, or, you know, make discoveries about the way that things in themselves, or, you know, I shouldn't say things in themselves, I should say the way that the world is oriented. You know, it could be something about knowledge they discover, it could be something about ethics or aesthetics. There could be something about the way the world is that we have ignored, or that we have, well, ignored is pretty good. Yeah. There could be something about the way the world is that we have ignored, and that by paying attention to it, we gain a better foothold on what's going on. And so maybe we end up a little bit less likely to fall into all kinds of traps, all kinds of logical traps, right? So because we become altered, we change ourselves, and so we don't become targets for different types of manipulation, perhaps. I mean, you could easily say that, well, if you're living in poverty, well, you're the ultimate target to manipulation. You could say that too. But let's say that, just humor me for a moment. Let's say that the ultimate nature of reality is something that is, in fact, accessible to human beings. Then it may be the case that merely by making that alteration, that the kinds of games that are being played with us, in terms of, make more money, therefore you will be more happy, like that's an obvious lie. But a lot of people fall for it, and it's because of the thing that we talked about earlier, which is what? That we talked about words. And philosophy, for the most part, is expressed in terms of words. That is to say, when I say philosophy, a lot of people think, yeah, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And they don't really go much further. It's like the Mona Lisa of philosophy. But, yeah, that's expressible in terms of words. But what if philosophy was expressible in terms of images? All right. Huh. Imagine that. What if, and this does happen, like in logic, for example, you have pictures, but what if you can go further than that? What if it was the case that what we think of as mere abstraction, having no real meaning, actually held keys to the understanding of the world around us? Oh no. Oh wait. Hey, there's something there. Wait, hold on. If the world is something that is continually giving itself up to us, and the complexities that we seek are actually only hidden by the fact that we don't attend to them, or we don't have the equivalent of a smoke to lay them bare, then the things that we pay for are things that have been prepared and given to us in terms of the ways in which we have been taught to understand and break down the symbols. Oh no. What if that's true? What if that's true? What if we have the world? What if we have everything and we just are like living like slaves? We don't need to because we have everything and we're just ignoring it. We're allowing ourselves to be spoon-fed absolute trash. That's possible. That's kind of crazy. But that was a crazy little sequence of sentences there, right? That didn't make immediate sense, right? Huh. It's almost as though having the ability to generate that kind of sentence structure or follow that line of reasoning frees you from the kinds of traps that will force you to believe that by getting a bigger yacht, your world will be better. That by having more people under you in your workplace and you have more status or whatever, that somehow that was the key. Maybe if you recognized that this was only one mode of interpreting reality, and that the other modes of interpreting reality were just as available and perhaps equal or better than the modes of interpreting reality that are fed to us on a daily fucking basis. But where's the competition? Where are all the people that are seeing the other thing? Well, you gotta look for them. And when you find them, well, there are people who are drawing what is apparently nonsense, right? Like, imagine explaining this to somebody. Hey, I draw this picture, and this is what, when I draw this, I don't have to go to work. No. Now, obviously, you'd still have to go to work. Obviously, you still have to, like, adhere to the structures. Obviously, these things are, just because, if I believe thing X, or if I suspect thing X to be true, thing Y, which has been forced on me and is held as true by many people, it doesn't fucking disappear. It's still there. I still have to deal with it. I still have to talk to people. I still, I'm born into this world speaking English, right? A lot of people who live in America can sympathize with me with that. We were born into the world speaking English. Is there anything that's innately true about English spoken sentences? Absolutely not. There's nothing innately true about English spoken sentences. Think about that. Well, hold on. What's the parallel here? Why would you even say a thing like that? What's that have to do with anything? Well, we take it to be true. We take it, when I ask you, hey, tell me about yourself, and be as authentic as possible, well, you're going to use English, right? If you grew up speaking English as a child. In other words, the language with which you are most familiar becomes the stand-in for your identity. What? Well, hold on. What are you saying, man? Are you saying that I have to speak Spanish if I want to be myself? I never spoke Spanish. No, I'm not saying that. Come on. Do some thinking here. Who am I talking to? Children? I'm talking to myself. No. No, I'm saying that, like, if you truly wanted to express yourself authentically, you'd probably end up making a language of your own. You'd probably express yourself in a series of sounds that would be unintelligible to most people. And so you'd end up with what? Something that cannot be understood. And now the question becomes, well, can you say that you've expressed yourself authentically if no one understood you? And I guess that becomes a very subtle question there. It has to be, like, dealt with, but I want to kind of give you my knee-jerk reaction, which is, well, yeah, of course. I mean, if you've actually worked on it, and I'm going to use this word deliberately again, if you worked on it deliberately, and you've thought about it, and I'm saying deliberately because I want to avoid the term consciously, because there are ways in which, and I think about two things at once because there's something really kind of magical sort of opening up here. I hope you can see this and pay attention to it. Right. There are ways in which the subconscious reveals itself to us through the ways that we speak, the things that we care about. And I don't think that, I think it's a bit facile of a response to say that, oh yeah, because this came to me from my subconscious. This is the same thing. I think I talked about this in the last one. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Like, just because it came to you from your subconscious and the symbols seem to match up, it doesn't necessarily mean that what it looks like it means. There is work to be done. You have to really, like, ask yourself some questions. A lot of times the way that we mock therapists in, like, New Yorker cartoons, like, that kind of way of looking at things is like, oh, and what does it mean to you? But that is the sorry, this area is kind of interesting to me. That is like one of the primary ways that therapy works, is that they get you to start to put your ideas into words and really tag them in a way to give them a kind of a sense of structure. But it isn't necessarily the case that because you have habitually tagged a symbol with a certain meaning, that the meaning that you've assigned is accurate. There may be other ways, and again, iterative process, right? You're working on these things. You're trying to figure it out. And if you're doing it honestly, if you're looking at the ways that you're looking at things honestly, you may discover that you have a different set of beliefs than the ones you've always told yourself that you've had. And this is where the magic comes, I think. Because if you've told yourself one story about the world that you've encountered, but some other story is accurate, then you've been living in a way that is incongruous with your deep-seated beliefs. Whoa, hold on, what? Yeah, and now the cognitive dissonance begins, and now the real work begins, or can begin, I should say. It isn't necessarily the case that, you'll fix it all. There's some really fun stuff, or you'll fix it all in one go, I should say. Fun stuff happening here. Like these little tubes are poking up out of this structure here, and I've kind of assigned a kind of a cloud-like texture here. It's a symbol for clouds, I guess, like factory clouds. And then let's do kind of a tricky thing. Let's show the underside of a head, and then let this place that's opening up here, let's let that be a chest cavity. And now we're gonna do something really tricky, but I will accept it if I don't do it right. But I'm gonna do it as well as I can. It will be a hand. The hand will extend into space. Like this is a drawing by John Byrne or Jack Kirby. And look, it isn't great because I'm doing it in markers. But that's okay. It's all right. If I really wanted to do it right, I'd probably draw it properly first. But also, this is the kind of drawing, and this is one of the greatest things about these kinds of drawings, that you can start off being like, I am going to do something specific now, after all of this time where I'm deciding that things are going to be thus and such. Where everything is anything, and anything is everything. Everything is everything. Like, you can decide, all right, well, I made those quote-unquote mistakes, but you don't have to live in accordance with the world that is given to you by your conscious mind. You can then deviate and say, well, I played that note on my jazz solo, but perhaps if I follow that note with notes that match it, I'll create a different composition for my jazz solo. And now it's something that I enjoy not only more than I would have had I done this, have I sat down and drew this perfectly over and over and over again until I got it right, that whatever is revealed, if we go back to our discussion about symbols and surfaces and essences, like if we take that seriously, then what was given becomes something new, and in that new thing holds the potential for revelation, for breakthrough. And this is the exciting thing that people don't talk about. I mean, the dumb way to look at it is like, oh, you just drew a bunch of squiggles and oh, it doesn't matter. You can do that if you want. Like it's a very simple thing to just take something that was supposed to be one way and say, oh well, let's make it into something else. Let's cheat it into something else. And I think that the trick is to fully let go. And you can see where I haven't here, because I'm like, I'm going to draw these contour lines, and they're going to show you how that shape was, and da-da-da-da-da. And it's like I was trying to bring back the primary world, not the other world. I think that the more exciting thing to do is to try to find the way in which the other world, the other place, was making an attempt to reach out to me and speak to me. And that means seeing things not as I attempted to bring them into existence, but seeing things on their own terms. Come on guys, that's love, right? What is he talking about? We were talking about like symbols and stuff, and this guy suddenly brings up love. What does he mean by all that? Well, what I mean is that Thales, man, Thales. Okay, you really haven't really explained anything. You know that, right? You know you just said Thales, man, like a stoner, and you thought everybody was gonna get what you meant. Come on, can you do me a favor and just tell me? I don't have all day. What I'm trying to say here is that Thales was one of the first great pre-Socratic philosophers, and his way of seeing the world was by guessing, like his metaphysics, that everything was water. And there's something, I just saw a YouTube video about this not too long ago. What am I? Am I just like YouTube retranslator? But I guess, that's the way it is with knowledge. But yeah, Thales, everything is water. That is a metaphor, right? And you can make a tremendous amount of progress in trying to understand the natural world if you attempt to see reality on its own terms. It's a bit ironic that the greatest point of access, and this was not the YouTube video, this is my thinking right now, so I think I get credit for this, some credit anyway, is the greatest point of access for seeing things on their own terms is freaking metaphor, man. All right, I think I just can't avoid doing the whole stoner thing. I think I don't know, like if you get a good degree in philosophy, people sort of assume that you're oh, philosophy degree, you mean the stoners, ha ha ha. I don't know. Depends on probably what school you went to or whatever, how you view things. It might be the poets that are like into certain. Anyway, I'm gonna leave that alone for a minute. But yeah, minus the stoner voice. Metaphor is a way of seeing things, not, and this is the big contrast, not in terms of some sort of personification. Like, you're not seeing like, oh, the seasons change because of Hades and Persephone. You know, you're not looking at things in terms of myth. You're looking at things in terms of themselves. What is this part of physical reality? Well, it is like this part of physical reality. And now there's this potential for deeper understanding. Because now you can do some kind of a test. You can say, well, hold on here. If it is water, well, then it ought to have thus and such series of properties that water does. And now there's the possibility of repeatability, and I guess Karl Popper would talk about falsifiability. You get real science. But in the video, this is really cool, we talked about how, like, well, you know, we had it. We had part of the solution there with the ancient Greek pre-Socratic philosophers. But then we just kind of said, no, that's not good. We don't need to do that. And we went to like a more religious way of looking at things. And we went to focusing and thinking about religion, and, you know, Christianity ruled for a while, and Dark Ages, da-da-da-da. And then we had an Enlightenment. You know, you had Francis Bacon and some other badasses. It was back when being really smart and seeing things in a really clear way made you a badass. I guess some people still respect that, but it's just about frowned on these days to see things clearly. It's almost as though seeing things in a more hazy way and seeing things more like this is actually it's viewed as superior. And you know what? I don't think they're wrong. What? I thought you were like a philosopher, analytical dude, man. What are you saying? I thought you were on our side. All the people who, you know, are philosophers and mathematicians who are like sowing their oats by looking at some crazy person on YouTube drawing are saying that. But I think there's actually some truth to it. In other words, I think that there's power in personifying a force and saying, well, you know, water is like this. Like, it is a fallacy, you know. There's a specific fallacy, I think it's called the anthropomorphic fallacy, where you take like a personality and you ascribe it to a process, and then you try to explain further things about that process by assuming that other things about the process will obtain merely because of the assumptions that we make about people. But that's silly. But what is powerful, though, is that if you can summon up a full understanding of true, verifiable, well, I should say true in the sense that it's verifiable, ways of looking at things, if you can summon up a whole host of those things by virtue of, you know, calling up a personality, more power to you. Continue with your work, dear sir, or madam, or whatever the case may be. Yeah, so there's that interesting idea, I think. So yeah, the Enlightenment sort of pushed us towards the future as we know it, because then we get all this crazy technology and stuff. But we do seem to have gone too far in one direction, in a way. We seem to think that everything is resolved or is resolvable in terms of the ways that we interpret physical matter. But we've hit some roadblocks, as a lot of you are aware. And I don't think I don't want to go into all this quantum stuff because, to be honest, I don't think I have the acumen for it. That's another channel. But it's super exciting, super interesting to think about, like the ways that we try to make measurements, but then we find that the means for making measurements fail us. And so something else has got to be done. Some other way of thinking about it. Some new paradigm has to come into place for us to walk away with something predictable. And at the moment, at least for me, it takes on a kind of character, a personality, if you will. And by that I mean that reality is being obstinate. It seems to be intentionally withholding its secrets. But that's, I mean, I guess that's always been the case. Whenever we hit a roadblock, it's like, yes, nature is mysterious. And then we just kind of like, oh, okay, well, we'll wait till somebody else comes up with something else, or we push it and push and push. And then somebody discovers something by accident and we move forward or whatever. But that seems to be the pattern in general. It's not too dissimilar from the whole God of the gaps thing. That idea, which I find fascinating. Oh, we don't have any more solutions? Oh, well, must be God. It's a bit lazy, I think, when people just sort of put down all of their tools for thought because they've reached an impasse and they don't want to appear foolish. So they say, oh, must be God. And if enough people that are, that they're surrounded by and they have a certain amount of social standing, if they believe in the same kinds of things that you have acted like you believed in, and if there's like enough of like a social push to encourage that kind of thinking, that kind of believing, then you get away with it, man. You get away with being lazy. And it even comes across as a kind of a piety. And that's the death of everything right there. I mean, you find that in corporate boardrooms, I think. I mean, I've definitely encountered it in things that are of less import than a corporate boardroom, where there's a general way of thinking, Oh, when we encounter this problem or this kind of problem, this will be our attitude, and it counts as thought. You'll see this. I mean, if you're a young person watching this and you haven't really entered the work world, you'll see that there will be a time when you'll be called upon to work on a problem. No one has a solution to it, and so everybody gathers together, and they're supposed to present the solutions that they came up with over the last few days or whatever. Or something is presented, some data is presented, and then if you're sitting next to the CEO or whoever will have as the stand-in for the CEO, then people will go around the room and go, oh well, here's the obvious thing we got to do. We got to do thing X, and thing X just happens to be another iteration of the kind of solution that we know that the CEO or whoever it is that we're counting, it could be some manager or something like that, whatever they're likely, or whatever we anticipate that they're likely to accept as an answer, because they don't want to be wrong either. So they will accept the answer that what? Exactly. That they won't get in trouble for, that they can explain, that they can talk to their superior and say, hey, look, we did the thing that we did last time, and the thing that we did last time, that worked. So, I was doing something reasonable when I did that. So what's wrong with that? Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you always do that? Well, because it totally excludes real thought. It's not thinking. It's just taking up a rubric and just being like, okay, this is what I'm going to do whenever I'm called upon to think. Like, come on, guys. What are we doing here? Really, like, if the project was important, yeah, you can tell I'm kind of working I'm working out some old problems. But it is something that I do, I do see from time to time in my day-to-day life. And people, hey, you see it, let's just take the movies, man. Like, you don't have to go into, like, but revealing potential secrets. But, yeah, the movies. You're a studio exec. Someone comes up to you and says, hey, I want to try to do a movie about blah, blah, blah. Okay. Why do you think the audiences are going to go for blah, blah, blah? Well, I just really like it. Huh? Sorry. If I actually go to my boss and say, I'm going to do this because they say they like it, even though I don't really get it, because come on, let's be honest here. A lot of those people, they don't make it to those positions because they're like super creative and spend all their time thinking about stories and like how stories work. And I mean, they do think about how stories work, but they're not like coming up with stuff on their own. They're not really pushing boundaries, Like, you're not going to see David Lynch as a studio head. I mean, unless it's his studio that he bought and paid for himself. Like, he's not going to ascend some sort of corporate ladder, not being him. He's my paradigm case. I think that you'll find him acceptable as the paragon of being an artist in the movie industry. He has all the hallmarks. He's frustrated by the right kinds of things. So even if you weren't someone who cares a lot about art and like thinks like I do, you'll look at all of the surface level details. You see how this is wrapping around in a nice way? But yeah, you'll see that he's doing a lot of the same kinds of things that artists do, or, visual artists do. And then you'll accept what I'm saying here, which is that when you're a studio exec and someone hands you an off-the-wall idea, you fucking reject it. Unless there is some other way that person can prove that the idea that they're handing them makes financial sense. Show me a way that it's worked in the past. Show me that it's an iteration of something else. Otherwise, I'm going out on a limb. And for what? For what? I'm making Waterworld here. Oh, my career will be sunk. And my kids will starve. But their kids won't starve. I won't be able to buy that new yacht. Or whatever. That's my very prejudiced way of looking at these people. They're probably a little bit deeper thinkers than that. But there is a lot of fear, I think, when it comes to creative thought. Like, if I present this to, DC Comics, this very drawing that I'm doing, they'd be like, what are you doing, man? There's no story here. Show me a beginning, show me a middle, show me an end, show me storytelling. This is you doodling, man. But I maintain that that there's value in this kind of thinking, in this kind of way of being. I think that there's value even beyond the therapy level. And it is relatively, I would say it's even more cognitive or more cognitively expansive than the kinds of thinking that you do, or that one does, when you're evaluating something like, oh, here is a Thesis in the Minotaur. If I do that, and then, like, I don't know, let's put Donald Trump's head on the Minotaur or whatever. Okay, I see what you're saying. You have recognizable symbols, and you have a combination. It's this but that. It's a very simple formula to do. But if you've done something like this, you've got multiple different types of symbols, multiple different ways of interacting with space, and it isn't quite clear at all that the ways that I've worked with space here have anything at all to do with the ways that I've worked with space here. To put it, like, quite frankly, it's a mess, right? You can have that attitude if you want, but you might be depriving yourself of something. What do you mean? Why would you say you're depriving yourself of something? Well, I'm saying that there might be something here. There might be a way in which things are related to each other that you have discovered and you have maybe ignored. And this goes back to what I was talking about before. I hate that phrase, by the way. This goes back to, it's a perfectly rational phrase, but I do try to stop myself from using it. I think it has something to do with the way that, like, there's nothing actually traveling. I don't like that use of, like, figurative space. Nothing is going anywhere. Anyway, that's a different topic. But I'm working on the shiny side here, so there's a little bit of blurring here. But as I discussed in the previous video, I'm perfectly okay with a little bit of blur. In fact, I'm perfectly okay with a lot of blur. Because I do like the feel of the shiny side, and I do like the potential that the randomness of a blur might introduce. And so there ends up being, well, potential aesthetic beauty, you know. Like if I took a blur and I, you know, took it to its extreme, I could show some way that things are connected that isn't immediately available without the blur, right? Or disconnected, whatever. This feels like celery to me. That's a sentence I did not expect to hear myself say at some point today. This feels like celery to me. I'm gonna shape out that celery so it actually pokes out here. So there's a kind of concavity here and a convexity there. So I'm playing with space. I'm allowing something that was ostensibly flat to reveal itself, to have multiple dimensions of interplay. And there we have one of the standard themes in a lot of my work, or a lot of this kind of work anyway, where that which was previously thought to be mere symbol and devoid of meaning was revealed to have multiple interpretations and capacity for, shall we say, mining. Yes, let's mining. You can mine these kinds of drawings for relationships that reveal ideas, man. And that's what it's about, I think. I think the world is idea. I'm sorry? Are we going back to the whole pre-Socratic thing? The world is idea. Excuse me? Yeah. To some extent, yeah, that's what it is. But, you know, since ideas aren't, or since idea, singular plural, is not something that's measurable. It isn't as though I can just say, oh, here is the idea. That thing, like, it doesn't feel very useful. But if we take it to be the truth, what happens then? And this, I think, is in a lot of ways, it's the better experiment. When it comes to abstract concepts, I guess it would be like the reverse of a reductio ad absurdum. For those not in the know, reductio ad absurdum is when you take a concept or idea and you play it out. You try it out mentally. You run a thought experiment in which you take the idea to be true, and then you ask yourself, well, does the situation that comes about as a result of taking that to be true lead you to some kind of contradiction? And it isn't always the case that by performing a reductio, you will get to a fundamental truth. In other words, there are reductios that fail even though they explicitly demonstrate that the concept given is, or the idea given is paradoxical. Now, what is the word? The project of humans gaining knowledge, like that project is far from over. So it may be the case that the reductios that we've performed that show quite explicitly that there is a paradox, those could be reversed at some point in the future. You know, the whole Wittgensteinian thing. Nothing is immune to revision. Yeah. And that's true, I would say, for the most part. For all the parts. There's always the possibility that in the future, at the very least, some level of minute detail will have been observed to be false. And by amending our prior hypotheses, we gain access to a deeper form of truth. And depending on like our, how far along we are, whatever that might mean, we move forward, man. We get closer. Closer to what? Closer to understanding things? Yes. Closer to acting and thinking wisely about what we've understood? That remains to be seen. I think a lot of times, and I think I might have mentioned this in this very talk, in this very project, there are a lot of times where humans move forward on projects merely because they believe that by doing so, they gain access to a greater level of control, a greater level of power, greater level of dominance over other humans. And that is taken to be equivalent, or shall I say, even better than understanding. Wait, what? Better than understanding? What do you mean? What greater understanding can someone demonstrate than by having the ability to dominate others who don't understand something? Well, see, this is the problem, motherfucker. Wait, hold on. Hey, you can't just talk to people like that. Oh, but that is kind of how I feel. I'm a little bit angry about it. I think a lot of people look at philosophy, they look at knowledge, they look at science, and they go, oh boy, rubbing their hands together greedily. I wonder how I can use this to make my life easier, What if I didn't have to, work as hard? What if I didn't have to actually confront the problems that human beings have to confront? And instead, I just used this cheat code, and now I've made water into wine, I've performed this miracle, and now I don't have to do the kinds of things that human beings have been doing for a long time that really actually enrich their lives. If you stop yourself from doing the kinds of things that humans have been doing for a long period of time to enrich their lives, and you have not done the work to find out what that stuff is and how it works and what it does, you'll be lost. You won't understand why everything is falling apart. Like, okay, let's take let's imagine somebody sells drugs to their community. That's good. They sell drugs to their community. Oh boy, I understand economics. I understand how to appear tough. I understand security so that I don't get stuff stolen from me. All right, I've used my knowledge. I've applied it with wisdom, quote unquote wisdom. In other words, I've put my knowledge to practice in a way that doesn't cause contradiction. And now I don't have to think about what my wife has to say. Oh, what? I don't have to encounter another person who is opposing me. I have direct control over them, and I think of them as a subservient sheep that I control directly. Their thoughts, their feelings, they mean nothing to me. I stand over them like a master, and I tell them what to do. No one tells me what to do. It sounds like a weird psychopathic dream, but in a weird way, that's kind of what a lot of people are living for, really. I think secretly a lot of people, that's kind of what they want. They don't want to admit it, but I think that we want our lives to be easier, which means we don't want to be forced to do things that we don't want to do. I mean, how simple is that, right? And how do you get there? Well, you get there by doing the things you don't want to do. And so you get to this point where you're like, I've been doing things I don't want to do my whole life. I don't want to do it anymore. So you guys have to do it. You guys haven't paid your dues, so you better get cracking, you know? And I think that that's a mistake. I think that when you throw out the idea that other human beings ought to be listened to and paid attention to, and we should make the effort to understand them and not merely coerce them into doing what we want them to do, if you throw that out, you've lost a big part of your humanity. And I hope that you figure out what that is. And I hope that you can arrange your mind in such a way that this doesn't persist. I say that with a heavy heart because it's the sort of thing that happens to a lot of people. I mean, shoot, man, we all been there. We've all been young. We've all felt, well, we've all been young. I could be talking to, I don't know how old the people are that I'm talking to. But as a young person, you do have a feeling of like, I'm invincible. Nothing bad can happen to me. And so you'll try, you'll take risks that you probably shouldn't. And so a lot of the people that warn you, that say, hey, don't go that direction, things will go badly for you, you shut it out. You say, I'm going to try this anyway. I'm going to behave as though my knowledge is ultimate knowledge. And when you achieve positive results, you receive confirmation that it is true. You do, in fact, have access to, I don't know, the philosopher's stone when it comes to, mental behaviors. That you can think clearly, that you can see clearly, that you have ultimate wisdom. And so when another person who might not be doing so well offers you advice, you say, hey, I don't gotta listen to you. But you're forgetting that all of the time, every piece of information that has come to you has come by way of another being. So you're not omniscient. You didn't invent knowledge. You have access to knowledge. You have access to a means to develop the knowledge that you've been given. But you are not the knowledge yourself. I mean, to an extent you are, if you want to get super philosophical about it. But we're going to leave that alone for now, because I want to focus on this idea of the ego. The ego creeps in, says, I know the way. And if you believe it, and you're right, you win, right? But if you win too much, or if you win too hard, if you win in such a way that you've reduced the humanity of those around you, if you've turned them into blind sheep that do whatever you ask them to do, then you've made clones of yourself and have become poorer because of it. There is more than just power in diversity. The richness in the expression of humanity grants diversity of perspectives. And in encountering diversity of perspectives and taking those perspectives in seriously, with love, not shutting them out merely because they're not your own. By taking those in, we make ourselves richer. We make our worlds richer. And I mean that both ways. Economically, and just frickin' life, man. Like, how boring would your TV be if every time you turned it on, it was only a Martin Scorsese film? Like, say what you will about Martin Scorsese, surely he's one of the greats. But if I turn on the TV and I don't get, Paul Rubens, at least on one channel, something's off. We need to have multiple ways of looking at things. We need to remember that alternate ways of looking at things are not just obstacles on our path, but ways to give ourselves the very things we have been working for. And that's not easy to see. Because when you're working really hard for something, the way to get there is by focusing, trying really, really, really hard, doing this thing, right? And then you keep pushing, and then everything is black. And if you push hard enough, you find that everything black is also everything white. And that's, I think that that's the beginning to a kind of redemption, right? When you see that there's a crossover. But a lot of people just kind of stay in that midpoint there because you're told, oh, I got to keep things balanced. And if you don't keep things balanced, then, you're forced over that edge. And when you cross that boundary, you do that wild learning thing that human beings do. If you don't cross the boundary, and you kind of stay in that stasis state where you're trying to maintain balance, but balance ain't forthcoming. Alright. I think this is going on way too long. This is becoming an interesting piece. I did want to do more of these like larger shapes. And I did some, but I think that, you heard my thought. My thought was going into a very, let's be complimentary about myself here. I was going into a very deep place. Or shall we say, let's be less complimentary. I was going into a detailed place. And it should be no surprise, it should count as no surprise, that the kinds of thoughts that I was expressing were mirrored in the kinds of lines and forms and shapes and relationships I was creating on the paper. So this is the thing. This is the thing. This is the exciting thing, guys. Think about this. Think about how different it is to work and think this way compare it to what it is to work and think in the other way, which is to say, I want to draw a picture of a duck. What does a duck look like? Gotta make it look like a duck. Like that's a different process. It's not wrong, you know? I'm not saying only do it this way, but there's something to be had here. Like, look at the way that these forms here sort of echo those forms here. Look at the way that this is a face or a skull, and at the top of the face of the skull, it sort of disappears. And we talked about that blowing out of highlights. And then here we have this extensor, you know, protruding backward into this shape, which it seems unresolved. I'd probably work on that a little bit more. And that is extending out beyond the eyes into what appears to be a kind of mask-like shape. And extending from the back of that mask-like shape, we have what appear to be something like tentacles or hair tentacles. And this extensor shape seems to change format. That is to say, it goes from being something absolutely solid through a gate of sorts at the front of this mask and becomes a series of, can we say, atomized, to resort back to this thing? But yes, a kind of a digital way of looking at things. It's either there or it isn't, and those are granted a kind of directionality by virtue of the triangle shape. And they seem to have a terminus here in this face or mask-like shape that has extensors, flames, hair, what have you, coming out from the front of that mask. And then the flames seem to be continued on the opposite side of the eyes. It's as though whatever it was on this side, it's extending itself through the eyes and then passing itself along and becoming multiple iterations of itself. All right, and all of this seems to be a kind of a smoke. This can go on for quite some time, but, you know, looking at it, thinking about it, all kinds of things start to emerge. We can talk about the way that this feels digital, and if we say this is digital, well, then the things that are opposed to it become something other than digital. We can say electricity, and if that's electricity and fire, well, then this ends up being a kind of a water. And then all the different things that come along with elementals, right? So we've got digital, I've got 1, 2, 3 sections here. Don't see what that exactly. And then we have something that feels like organic, or something like an animal sort of a texture, and that's coming into or being forced into another kind of a shape. And then we have another kind of identity here that is related to these in the form of that billowing smoke that we talked about earlier. I feel like I could develop these clouds a little bit more. I don't like it being that much of a symbol. And this body seems to be bending out of shape and staring up at this relationship. So there's a kind of a we think about metacognition, there could be a undercognition, like looking at oneself not from above but from below. And that's what this seems to suggest. There's a kind of a window that's formed underneath this hand, and in that window we have what appear to be a drooping of shapes that suggest a kind of an overlapping and underlapping of something that feels very intestinal. Everything here feels like it's mental, like it's not like, oh, you're mental, dude, but mental in the sense that it's not physical. And if these overlappings and underlappings are intestinal but also mental, then we can start talking about things like nodal systems, like the way that these are forming sort of shapes, so they become connectors. And it's as though this portion that continues up back here, up into this window, is a kind of a window of some kind into a world that is distinct from what we normally call the real world. This whole thing, like, it becomes a window. This drawing like this becomes a window for self-reflection, self-discovery, figuring out what the heck's going on, man. I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's enough to read the newspaper. I think that you got to figure out what's going on inside of you. I think that a person who thinks about more than just the way that things outside of them are comported. I do like that word, comported, don't I? Oriented. If we think about things more than in those terms, and we look inside of ourselves, and we look at those relationships that obtain, we gain the potential, at the very least, we gain a potential for insight to our perspectives, which when held in opposition to, or in tandem with, or parallel to the ideas and thoughts of others, grant freaking depth, man. You get there's a richness that comes from it. The world opens it up to one. The world opens itself up, and we get more. We get better stuff. This flatness that the world seems to suffer from seems to evaporate when we start to look at things this way. And everything we look at encourages us to do the opposite. We're told to look at things and go, well, how can I get money out of this? And that ain't it, man. I think people say, that ain't it, chief. I think that's how I'm supposed to say it these days. That ain't it, chief. You want to open the world up. If you want to be rich, then you want to see the ways in which you are already rich. And in recognizing that, you will have a richer attitude, and you'll recognize that the money is not going to give you the things you really want. I mean, I say that while, recording this on an iPhone, and like I'm doing all right. But the good part of the world, the part that you want to keep, it's not necessarily the things that will give you money. You want to develop skills for thought, ways of handling concepts. If you develop those, then it doesn't matter what the world throws at you. We're entering a phase of our development of humanity where we're being thrown madness on a scale we haven't seen before. Absolute madness. And the tools that we've been given in school, or the ones that we were supposed to get that we didn't get, even those will prove themselves inadequate. What's absolutely necessary is that we develop skills and tools for the coming world as it comes to us. It's gonna get crazy, guys. I love you. This is taking too long. I hope you have a good night or a good day, whatever the case may be. This is me signing off.